They called him a bum, laughed at him, said he was crazy. But when he touched the car, the whole garage realized they were face to face with a forgotten legend. The noise of compressors, hammers, and rattling tools echoed like the soundtrack of another sweaty morning at John's auto shop. In the heart of Los Angeles, the place ran more on shouts than profit, kept alive by loyal customers and plenty of honest quick fixes. Olivia, her hands covered in grease and her hair hastily tied back, glanced at the clock for the third time. Her father had gone out for parts, the mechanics were swamped, and the rich client's black Mercedes was still there, motionless, enigmatic, and infuriatingly silent. That's when the shop door opened with a slow, almost ceremonial creak. A man walked in, dirty, scruffy beard, worn-out clothes in some undefined shade of beige. He smelled of time and neglect. Sunken eyes, but alive. He looked lost in the world, and yet he stood there with a purpose. "I can fix that car," he said, pointing to the Mercedes. No one answered. The three mechanics stopped working. Jack, the most foul-mouthed and sarcastic of the crew, was the first to break the silence. "Well, look at that. The NASA engineer just showed up. Gonna fix the spaceship with positive thinking, huh?" The others laughed. Olivia didn't. "And what do you want in return?" she asked bluntly. "A sandwich, if you've got one, and a glass of water." Jack burst out laughing. "Girl, just give the man a glass of water with some WD-40 in it and send him on his way." Olivia ignored the remark. She looked at the Mercedes. The car had been there for weeks, plagued by an electrical problem no scanner could detect. The client was pressuring them, threatening to take it to the dealership, but Olivia insisted they'd figure it out. It was a matter of pride. And now, this stranger? She studied the man. There was nothing crazy in his eyes, just exhaustion and a strange sense of certainty. "All right, but if you screw this up, you're out." He nodded slightly, almost like a thank you. He picked up a screwdriver from the workbench as if it were a childhood toy. Walked to the car with the steady confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Jack leaned against the wall, laughing. "Look at this. He's really about to mess with the Mercedes. This is how we get screwed for good." Olivia silenced them all with a single glare. Stephen popped the hood. His movements were methodical, almost choreographed. He touched wires, checked connections, listened carefully to the clicks of the relays. No scanner, no devices, just his ears, his fingers, and his eyes. 3 minutes passed. Then he did something no one expected. He disconnected the battery, cut a specific wire, made a quick manual fix with solder, and tightened a connector as if he knew exactly where the problem was. He closed the hood. "Try it now," he said, looking at Olivia. She hesitated, slid into the seat, turned the key. The engine roared back to life as if waking from a coma. Smooth, powerful, flawless. No one said a word. Jack stood there, mouth hanging open. Olivia stepped out of the car in silence, looked straight at Stephen. "How did you do that?" He shrugged. Not arrogance, just simplicity. The wiring harness to the ECU was shorted. Corrosion caused a bad contact. "I just had to reorient the line. Happens all the time with imported modules," Jack muttered, baffled. "But the scanner didn't catch any of that." "Scanners don't smell burnt plastic," Stephen replied calmly. "They don't hear the wrong click of a relay. Sometimes you've got to listen to a car like it's a person." Olivia walked over to the snack bar next door, bought a grilled ham and cheese and a bottle of water, handed them to him. "Here, thanks." He received the food as if it were a medal, sat down on the shop floor, off to the side, and ate slowly, savoring each bite with the calm of someone who had been at war for a very long time. The mechanics went back to work, but the atmosphere had changed. A strange silence hung in the air. No one knew who he was or where he had come from. But one thing was certain, he wasn't just anyone. Olivia watched from a distance, her mind racing. The question that lingered unspoken was simple. Who the hell is this man? The next morning, the man was gone. No trace of him, not even a scrap of paper left behind. Jack cracked a joke. Must have gone back to his spaceship or evaporated with the grease. Olivia didn't reply. She just stared at the spot where Stephen had sat the day before. It felt too empty, as if some part of that place had been carried away with him. The Mercedes was still running perfectly, but the fix, that precise move executed in minutes, kept replaying in her head like a film without explanation. Days passed. The heat grew harsher. The shop busier. People came and went, and no one mentioned the stranger again. Until one stifling Tuesday, when a car packed with people sputtered to a stop in front of the garage, a battered blue Fiat Uno smoking from the hood. A woman jumped out frantic. "For God's sake, somebody help me! My son's sick!" From the back seat, a man emerged carrying a limp child in his arms. The boy was pale, his eyes rolled back, breathing raggedly. High fever, low blood pressure, desperation filled the air. "The car died, and we need to get to the neighborhood hospital," the woman cried. All the mechanics were tied up with big jobs. Olivia rushed to check on the boy. "The hospital's 5 minutes from here," the mother said on the verge of tears. "But we can't get there on foot." And that's when a shadow appeared in the corner of the shop. Stephen. The same dirty clothes, beard maybe a bit fuller, but his eyes still the same. Steady, precise. He walked over to the Uno without a word, opened the hood, sniffed the engine, pressed a connector, tapped lightly on the distributor cap, revved the throttle by hand. "Turn it over," he said, looking at the boy's father. The man obeyed. The Uno coughed once, then started. Weak, but alive. Stephen crouched down, worked quickly beneath the car, tightening something with a lug wrench he grabbed from a nearby cart. Then he stood, shut the hood. "Drive straight. Don't stop. It'll hold." The father looked at him, at a loss for words. "Go!" Stephen barked, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. The Uno lurched forward, shaky but moving. Silence filled the shop. Olivia stared at Stephen as if she had seen a ghost. "How did you know what it was?" "Fuel pump failing, ground wire loose. I just gave it enough strength to make it. After that, the car dies," he said simply. She stepped closer. "You disappeared. Why?" "I don't stay in one place too long." "But why help them? You don't even know them." He looked away, scratched his chin, spoke softly. "Because no one helped when I needed it." And before she could ask anything else, he walked off, toward the street, again. But this time, Olivia didn't let him slip away completely. That evening, when things had calmed down, she went to her father's desk, where he kept old papers, newspaper clippings, and beat-up auto magazines. A messy box where old John stored memories of the shop. She spent an hour digging through it, and then she found it. A worn-out magazine from 1998. On the cover, a rally car covered in dust, and right beside it, standing triumphantly with a trophy in hand, a smiling man. Stephen, younger, clean-shaven, but the look in his eyes, the same. Focused, intense. The caption read, "Stephen Clark, Golden Hands, 3-time champion of the Baja 1000. Olivia's heart skipped. The man who had fixed a car for a sandwich was a champion? She took the magazine home, scanned every line of the article. Read about the victories, the technical brilliance, the meteoric rise. But then, at some point, the story just stopped. No explanation for the disappearance, only silence. The next morning, Stephen was back, leaning against the garage wall. Olivia handed him a coffee. He accepted it without a word. Jack, standing nearby, spoke up, more subdued than usual. "What you did yesterday, that was badass." Stephen just nodded. No medals, no applause, just quiet. But Olivia knew that behind that silence lay a massive story, and she was determined to uncover every piece of it. Olivia didn't sleep that night. The image of the magazine cover kept spinning in her mind like the engine of a car that refuses to shut off. The smile of the man in the photo, helmet in hand, and clothes splattered with mud, seemed to belong to another life, another world. Nothing about him resembled the hunched walk and weary gaze of the man who drifted in and out of the shop like a tired ghost. But the eyes were the same. She spent the night digging. Old websites, racing forums, archived reports. The deeper she searched, the larger the figure of Stephen Clark became. Champion of the Baja 1000 in 1996, 1997, and 1998. Nicknamed Golden Hands by the press for his unmatched skill behind the wheel, and even more for his uncanny ability to tune his own car mid-race. Many said that if he had gone to Europe, he would have become a world legend. But in 2009, after a car accident that killed his wife and 6-year-old daughter, he vanished. Literally. Off the map. No news, no interviews, nothing. Many believed he had taken his own life. Others thought he had fled abroad. Olivia now knew the truth. He was here, sleeping in shelters or on sidewalks, living off odd jobs, fixing cars for a mortadella sandwich. The next morning, she waited for him to arrive. He showed up at 7 a.m., as if he somehow knew this day would be different. She wasted no time. "I know who you are." Stephen froze. His whole body went rigid. "You were a rally driver, Stephen Clark, Golden Hands. 3 titles, and then you disappeared." He looked at her with a weight you don't see in ordinary people. It was as if he had aged 10 years in 3 seconds. "You're mistaken." "No, I'm not. I saw the pictures. I read the articles. You're not just anyone. You were someone. Someone big." He lowered his eyes. "Were. That's right." Olivia stepped closer, speaking softer now. "Why didn't you tell me?" Silence. A truck rumbled down the street. A dog barked in the distance. Then Stephen spoke. "Because telling doesn't change anything. It won't bring my daughter back. It won't undo what I did." She waited, didn't interrupt. He went on, his voice steady but cracking. "It was my day off. Heavy rain. I was at home. I'd had a drink at lunch. Not much, but enough. The little one wanted to go to the mall with her mom. I said I'd take them. I just wanted to drive. Driving was what I did best. Only that day, I wasn't the best. The car skidded, flipped. I survived. They didn't." Olivia felt her chest tighten. There was no repair manual for how to respond to that. "After that," he continued, "I tried to keep going. Drank more. Slept in one place, woke up in another. Friends drifted away. Sponsors vanished. One day I woke up with no house, no name, nothing. Just these hands. And I didn't even want to use them anymore." She discreetly wiped her eyes. "But now you're here. You saved that kid. You fixed the Mercedes. You've helped this shop more than some full-time employees." He shook his head. "I don't want anything. No job, no money, no forgiveness. Just a quiet corner. And maybe something to do with my hands, before they forget what they once were." She took a deep breath. "I don't see a failure. I see someone broken, but still whole enough to rebuild." He didn't answer. But for the first time since she had met him, Stephen held Olivia's gaze without looking away, as if testing whether there was still a chance for something, for anything. That's when Jack appeared in the doorway of the shop, sweating, holding a flat tire. "Hey, Olivia, this Goals tire is trashed. If someone could just..." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw them. Olivia gestured quickly. "Stephen will take a look for you." Jack hesitated, stared at Stephen. The same man he had mocked as a bum weeks ago. "If he wants to," Olivia added, her eyes locking on both men. Stephen took a deep breath, walked over to Jack, grabbed the tire, turned it in his hands, pressed the rim's edge. "This bead's blown. Whole thing has to be replaced. I'll mount the new one." Jack nodded, a little awkward, but there was respect in his eyes. As the two headed into the shop, Olivia remained standing there on the sidewalk, feeling the weight of the morning. She knew the road ahead would be hard, that the truth could bring discomfort, prejudice, judgment. But she also knew something else. The garage would never be the same again. John, the shop's owner, stood with his arms crossed, snorting. The furrow in his brow betrayed his skepticism. Olivia spoke calmly, but with steel in her voice. "Dad, he fixed 2 cars no one else here could solve. He saved a child, and he didn't ask for anything in return. If that's not worth a chance, then what is?" John scratched his head, glaring at the service board with fake anger. "I don't like trouble. This isn't a shelter." "But what if it can be both?" she countered. Silence. John let out a long sigh. Then he nodded toward the back door. "There's that little room out back, full of junk. If he wants to clean it out and sleep there, fine. But if there's even one hint of a problem, he's out." Stephen said nothing when Olivia told him. He simply began tidying the bare cement room, wiping the floor with an old rag and shoving boxes into a corner. Within hours, he had turned that cubicle into a shelter. A thin blanket, an old suitcase as a closet, and a screwdriver always within reach, as if it were an extension of his arm. The next day, he was already in uniform. An old shop coverall borrowed from another mechanic. The hem rolled up, someone else's name patched over with electrical tape. He didn't ask for assignments. He just took the ones nobody wanted, replaced brake pads in the midday heat, scrubbed rusted parts, dismantled engines with the patience of a watchmaker. And little by little, without anyone saying it, he became part of the team. Jack was the first to yield. He started calling him boss as a joke. But over time, the nickname turned into real respect. "Hey boss, take a look at this carburetor, it's breathing weird." Stephen would go over, explain calmly, sometimes even sketching diagrams on the floor with a stick. The other mechanics started imitating him, listening to his advice. Within weeks, he had become a reference point in the shop, without shouting, without needing to prove anything. But inside, the ghosts were still alive. At night, Olivia would hear footsteps in the yard, the drip of a leaky faucet, a glass falling, then silence. Stephen walked, thought, remembered, slept poorly, dreamed worse. One day, he disappeared. Again. 4 hours later, Jack found him sitting in an alley across the street, a bottle of cachaça in his hand. Still full, but shaking. Jack sat beside him. "What are you waiting for?" he asked without irony. Stephen didn't reply. "You think drinking's gonna make you forget, don't you? That it'll erase the real, but it doesn't. It just replays with a guilt filter." Still, Stephen stayed quiet. "If you're gonna drink, then drink. But know this, when you come back, if you come back, you'll have more to fix than just cars." Stephen's hand trembled. He stared at the bottle, then the cap, then the ground. And with a firm motion, he tossed the bottle onto the hard dirt. It didn't shatter, just rolled away, far. Jack patted him on the back. "Come on. Tomorrow we've got a G3 goal to bring back from the dead." The following week, Olivia called Stephen in to talk. He looked calmer, his face still heavy, but his eyes less lost. "Would you accept help? Professional help? Like therapy? Like a restart?" He thought for a long moment. "I can try, but no promises. That's already more than most people do." She connected him with a nearby support group. He started going once a week. Discreet. Cap pulled low, sat in the back. Didn't speak at the first meetings, but listened, and listened well. Back at the shop, productivity soared. Customers began to notice. They praised the work. Word of mouth spread. For the first time in years, the month's books closed in the black. One late afternoon, Olivia sat in the office, shuffling through papers, when an idea struck her. A seed of an idea. What if that place could be more than just a garage? What if Stephen wasn't the only one fixing his life there? She looked out the window. Stephen and Jack were laughing quietly over a Corsa with the hood up. The two of them, once so different, now working like brothers of the trade. Olivia smiled to herself. Maybe this was only the beginning. The morning had barely begun when a black sedan screeched around the curve and shot into the shop like a missile gone off course. A modern car, powerful engine, but in that moment it looked more like a wounded animal. From inside, a well-dressed man stumbled out in desperation. Wrinkled suit, loosened tie, folders thrown across the back seat. "For God's sake, does anyone here know how to deal with electronic modules?" he shouted. The mechanics exchanged glances. Jack raised his hands. "Relax, man, what's the problem?" The lawyer, because it was obvious he was one, threw the hood open in a rush. "The car shut off on the way. Ignition's failing. Dashboard flashing. Limp mode activated. I need to be at the courthouse in 50 minutes. I have evidence that will free an innocent man. If I don't get there, he's looking at 20 years for something he didn't do." Olivia stepped out of the office. Stephen was right behind her, wiping his hands with a rag. The lawyer pleaded. "I already tried another shop. They said it's the ECU corrupted module. That takes days to fix. But I just need it to run for one more hour, that's all." Jack shrugged. "Man, if the module's locked, that's it. Nobody reprograms that on the spot." Stephen walked up silently, looked at the car. "Give me 10 minutes. The lawyer looked at him, then at Olivia, searching for reassurance. "Trust him," she said. "If anyone can, it's him." The hood went up. Stephen set a stool to the side, sat down, and plugged an old laptop into the OBD. He typed like a surgeon operating in a crisis. Olivia filmed discreetly with her phone. Not for marketing, but out of instinct. Something about this deserved to be recorded. "It's not the ECU," Stephen muttered, almost to himself. "It's the torque sensor throwing false readings into the electronic throttle." He opened the lower panel, cut the sensor wire, rerouted the path with an improvised lead. Attached a resistor, sealed it with heat tape, reconnected. "Try it now." The lawyer turned the key. The engine roared to life, smooth, dashboard clean. No warning lights, no errors. "Drive straight, don't stop. It'll hold." The man barely managed to thank you. He just got in, floored it, and vanished down the avenue. Minutes later, silence hung over the shop. Jack broke it first. "You just reconfigured the injection mapping? From memory?" Stephen didn't even look up. "I just listened to the car." Olivia finished recording, then tucked her phone away as if holding gold. Hours later, the lawyer returned, the car still running, his face now relieved. "I delivered the evidence. The judge suspended the trial. The guy will answer in freedom. You have no idea what that means." He reached out his hand to Stephen, a firm grip from a man who recognized true worth. "I'll tell this story, not because of the car, but because you did something the system couldn't do in time." Stephen hesitated, but shook his hand. Then he walked back into the shop. By the time Olivia followed, he was already cleaning an alternator belt. "What you did," she said softly, "that wasn't just mechanics, that was justice. I don't want to be news. Maybe you need to be, not for you, but for the lives you can still fix." He shook his head. "I'm no hero. I'm just good with wires, cables, and engines. You're good with a lot more than that." 2 days later, the video Olivia had filmed was everywhere. WhatsApp groups, car forums, mechanic pages, a genius drifter fixing cars by ear, a forgotten legend clawing his way back from the abyss. The name Stephen Clark began resurfacing alongside his old nicknames. Golden Hands, the Ghost of Baja 1000, the Missing Driver. The shop phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, TV programs, social media influencers, all wanting an interview, a photo, a story. But Stephen vanished. Again. Olivia found him in the back lot, sitting on the ground, his back against the wall, eyes fixed on the gray sky. Running away? Breathing. She sat beside him. You don't need to run. Nobody here wants to exploit you. They just want to understand. I don't even understand myself. How will they? Silence. She pulled out her phone, showed him the recording, showed the comments, the messages, people thanking him, people moved. A father saying it gave him hope to help his son out of drugs, a teenager saying he wanted to learn mechanics because of him. Stephen looked at it all as if staring at an old wound exposed to sunlight. I don't know if I'm ready for all this. Maybe you're not. But what if you're ready to help someone? Just one? He closed his eyes, breathed deep. And for the first time since she had met him, Olivia saw a faint smile, subtle, almost invisible, but real, cross his face. And the story was only just beginning to leak out. It took 3 days. That was all it took for Olivia's video, where Stephen resurrected a car and saved a court case, to explode everywhere. The headline on the first news portal was blunt. Anonymous hero saves innocent man with pliers and a miracle. The article featured images of the garage, Stephen's serious face, the lawyer's testimony, and clips of him working with the calm precision of a battlefield surgeon. It didn't take long for other outlets to replicate the story, and soon they were accompanied by something heavier, his past. Stephen Clark, Golden Hands, 3-time Baja 1000 champion, alive, sober, and working in a garage. The shop turned into a tourist spot for journalists. Cameras at the door, microphones shoved in without invitation. Jack was thrown into fame against his will, giving chaotic interviews at the top of his lungs. Olivia tried to keep order. John, her father, nearly shut the shop down for a few days. But in the end, business boomed like never before. And Stephen vanished again. 2 days without a trace. Olivia began to fear the worst, but on the 3rd day, he reappeared, as always, without hurry, without excuses, his face tighter than before. I don't want cameras in my face, he said. I don't want my story on gossip sites. It's not about that anymore, Olivia replied. You've become a symbol. It's not just your story now, it's what it represents. He looked around, saw a boy across the street holding a folder of resumes, a delivery rider snapping a selfie in front of the shop sign, an elderly woman waiting just to give him a hug, and then he sighed. One interview, just one. Then it's over. It was a simple segment on an evening newscast. Olivia went with him. The crew was respectful, no cheap controversy, only honest questions. The fall, the pain, the streets, but also the restart, the garage, the sick child, the courthouse case, and at the end, the question the entire country wanted to hear. Stephen, what do you want now? He looked straight into the camera. I don't want fame. I don't want contracts. I just want to keep fixing what I still can. Engines, cars, souls, whatever comes. If I can help, that's enough. And that was it. In the days that followed, the garage began receiving letters. Real letters, paper, envelopes, stamps. They came from every corner of the country. Parents with lost children, young people wanting to learn mechanics, people asking for help, people offering it. An old woman sent a crochet piece with Stephen embroidered in the center. An 80-year-old ex-mechanic offered tools he no longer used. Olivia spent nights reading them, cataloging, sorting by theme, and in one of those sleepless dawns, eyes tired and mind racing, she had the idea. The next day, she called Stephen to talk. What if we used all this, the attention, the visibility, and turned the shop into something bigger? He frowned. What do you mean? A teaching garage, a social center, a place where broken people, like you once were, can learn to fix engines, and maybe themselves. Youth, the homeless, former addicts, single mothers, anyone who needs a real chance. He stayed silent for a long time. Only the sound of a grinder whirring in the background filled the air. It's a beautiful project, Olivia, but I don't know if I'm fit to be a symbol of anything. I'm still fixing my own parts. That's exactly why. You're not on a pedestal. You're down here, on the ground, where people live, where they break, where they restart. Stephen stood, walked to the gate, watched the street, kids playing soccer, an old car blasting loud music as it rolled by, a woman sweeping her sidewalk slowly, the city alive. And you think this can work here? I think we have to try. He nodded, no smile, no promise, but a spark in his eyes. Then let's try. By the end of the week, Olivia was already moving. She reached out to partners, NGOs, companies that could donate equipment, drafted a project outline. Jack even helped with the name. Stephen Clark Social Garage. It's got weight. It's got history. Stephen almost laughed. You're all crazy. No, Olivia said. We just believe that a second gear is always possible. And so, what had begun with a sandwich in exchange for a repair was about to become something far bigger than any of them had imagined. The old sign was carefully taken down. John's Garage gave way to something new, longer, more symbolic. Stephen Clark Social Garage and Rehabilitation Center. The paint was still drying when the first students arrived. There were 6 at the start. 2 boys who slept in city shelters, a former addict fighting to stay clean, a quiet woman with a scarred face, a survivor of domestic violence, and 2 brothers kicked out of their home for petty theft. None of them knew how to tighten a bolt. But they all had one thing in common. They were trying to start over. Stephen stayed silent through almost the entire first class. Olivia led the social side, explaining how things worked, the rules, the purpose. Jack demonstrated how to use tools without losing a finger. But deep down, everyone's eyes were on the man in the greasy coveralls, wiping his hands on a worn rag. When Stephen finally spoke, he went straight to the point. No one here is going to become a mechanic in a week, but every one of you can leave here better than when you came. And if you learn to listen to a car, maybe you'll start listening to yourselves too. The silence was absolute. And then the engines began to roar. In 3 months, the garage had transformed. And how? The service bays multiplied. An old warehouse next door was rented and turned into a classroom. A partner donated uniforms. An NGO brought psychological support. Olivia became the bridge between institutions. Jack was nicknamed Professor, reluctantly but secretly proud. And Stephen became the heart of the place. He taught without preaching. He showed by example, arrived early, watched each student as if they were an engine with a hidden fault. Every move he made was a lesson, but inside, he still bled. At the end of each day, when everyone left, Stephen stayed, sitting alone on the bench in the back of the garage, holding a small photo in his hand, his daughter, braids bouncing, smiling as she hugged a toy steering wheel. It was his ritual, memory and mourning, pain and anchor. Olivia knew, but she never intruded. She understood that even the best engines take time to adjust. One morning, during a class on spark plug replacement, a voice echoed from the entrance. "So this is where Golden Hands has been hiding?" Everyone turned. A tall man, gray-haired, in a simple suit, smiling like someone who knows all the shortcuts on the road. Stephen froze. "Christopher," he murmured, "thought you'd turned into a legend. Then I see you on the news fixing cars with tape and magic." It was Christopher Lawson, former navigator, Stephen's partner in rally days. The two had won championships together, crossed deserts, nearly died on back-road tracks. When the accident happened, Christopher had tried to reach him and been ignored. The reunion was dry. Stephen kept his distance. "I didn't come to collect anything," Christopher said. "Just wanted to see with my own eyes if it was true. And if it is, I want to help." Olivia felt the weight in the air, but she also saw something else, a door opening. With time, Christopher joined the project, brought contacts, companies, and most of all, an external, experienced eye that understood the value of what they were building. But along with growth came a hard choice. City Hall offered an official partnership, with funding, a new facility, dozens of new slots, and a contract, one that required changes, less freedom, more bureaucracy, maybe even pushing Stephen away from the front line. The decision landed like a bomb. Jack was against it. Olivia saw the potential. Christopher tried to mediate. Stephen stayed silent. That night, he locked himself in the garage, looked over his old trophies, now dusty in a corner, held his daughter's photo once more, thought about everything. What he had lost, what he could lose again. By morning, he came back with an answer. "I'll do it, but on one condition. No one here becomes a number. No student gets treated like a statistic. This place saves lives. It doesn't generate profit." Olivia smiled. Jack grumbled. Christopher shook his hand. They were in it together. The new facility began to take shape, with more space, more structure, but the same spirit. Stephen now signed documents, gave technical interviews, but still wiped grease from his hands with the same old rag. And now his eyes were steadier. There was still pain, but there was purpose too. And that, he had discovered, was what truly fixed you on the inside. The garage now had a different sound. It was the sound of youth. Laughter mixed with the hum of compressors. Hammer strikes blending with music from an old radio. Work bays filled with students. Well-kept tools. Neatly pressed uniforms. Organized charts. Stephen watched it all from a distance, sitting on a wooden bench he had built himself, beneath the shade of a freshly painted awning. In his eyes, the calm of someone who no longer needed to run. On his shoulders, the light weight of a past finally accepted. "Professor?" a small voice called. He turned. A girl of about 9, her hair in 2 braids, held up a bolt. "This one's from which car?" Stephen smiled, bent down, took the bolt gently. "That looks like it escaped from a square-body goal, probably missing home." She laughed, and in that laugh he felt a soft ache, memory and healing at the same time. "My dad says you fix everything." "Not everything, just what can still be fixed, and there's a lot that can." The girl ran back to the classroom. Stephen stayed there a little longer. The sound of the garage carried on. Familiar. Alive. Inside the new main building, Olivia was arranging decorations with a group of students. The big day had arrived. A small event. Symbolic, but important. Authorities, partners, former students, all gathered to reveal the center's new name. Stephen didn't know all the details. He was only called when everyone was already assembled in the courtyard. "Come here, boss," said Jack, now sporting a trimmed beard and a polo shirt with the project's logo. "Today, you're the one being honored." "They've already honored me with work," Stephen replied, trying to mask his nerves. Olivia stepped closer, took his hand. "This isn't for you. It's for what you represent." She pulled the cord on the cloth covering the plaque on the wall. "Emily Clark Educational and Social Garage, so that no life is lost on the curve." Silence. Stephen read slowly. Once, twice. The name of his daughter engraved there, in bronze. not as a memory of pain, but as a beacon, a name that now guided hundreds of young people toward a future with more open roads than dead ends. He stepped forward, pressed his palm against the plaque, stayed there, silent, eyes wet. No one said anything. No one had to. In the months that followed, the center became a national reference. Reports, technical visits, partnerships with automakers. But none of that mattered to Stephen anymore. He woke early, drank his coffee in silence, taught about belts, torque, exhaust systems, and he listened. Listening had become his greatest tool. Sometimes a student would ask about the championships. He would share a story or two, never boasting. Just showing that even those who win can fall, and that falling is not the end. At the end of the day, he still went to that same wooden bench, watched the students heading home, wiping grease from their hands, laughing loudly, making plans. It was there he breathed the deepest, there, where once there had been nothing, there where he himself had been repaired. Because in the end, Stephen didn't just fix engines, he fixed what people believed they had lost forever: hope. Stephen's story shows that even the most damaged engines can run again, just like we can. Tell me in the comments, what in your life still deserves a second chance? If this message touched you, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps this hope reach even more people.